It was a frigid winter night in Cleveland, Ohio, and I had just finished a late shift at the hospital. The streets were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling day I had left behind. I turned up the heat in my old Honda Civic and plugged in my favorite playlist, hoping to ease the exhaustion from hours of working in the emergency room. The snow was falling heavily, turning the road into a glistening white ribbon. With Christmas lights flickering in the distance, the serenity of the night was comforting, until I took the turn onto Route 90, heading home. After driving for about an hour, I realized the gas gauge was dangerously low. The next gas station was miles away, but then I spotted a small, dimly lit gas station off an exit I didn't remember taking. It seemed oddly out of place, surrounded by dense woods and devoid of any other structures. A flickering neon sign read, "Open 24 hours." Desperate to avoid running out of gas, I pulled in. The place was deserted, except for a lone attendant who watched me with unsettling intensity as I filled up the tank. As I was about to pay, I noticed the attendant's gaze following me intently. His eyes seemed almost too curious, as if he were trying to gauge my every move. I tried to brush off the discomfort and paid quickly, but his smirk and the way he lingered by the door left me feeling uneasy. The low hum of the fluorescent lights and the chill in the air added to the disconcerting atmosphere. I got back into my car, trying to shake off the unease, and hit the road again. Just as I began to relax, I saw a figure on the side of the road. In the dim light, it looked like a young man standing under the heavy snowfall, holding a sign that read, "Help." I considered ignoring him, but something about the sign and the dire situation made me stop. He looked shivering and desperate, so I rolled down the window and asked if he needed help. He quickly climbed into the passenger seat, his eyes darting around nervously as he thanked me repeatedly. As we drove, the young man introduced himself as Mike and explained that his car had broken down miles back. He seemed anxious, frequently glancing in the rearview mirror. I tried to make small talk, but his responses were short and erratic. The snow continued to fall heavily, and the road conditions worsened. My initial sympathy for his predicament started to fade as I noticed that he seemed more nervous than grateful, making me increasingly uncomfortable. Mike suddenly suggested a shortcut to avoid the traffic on Route 90. He claimed it would get us to a safer area quickly. I hesitated but was persuaded by his urgent tone. We took a narrow, winding road through the woods. The trees loomed ominously over the road, casting eerie shadows. My phone lost signal, and the feeling of isolation grew. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead due to the heavy snowfall and the darkness of the forest. As we continued down the desolate road, I noticed a shadowy figure on the edge of the forest, partially obscured by the snow. It seemed to be following us, moving at an unnervingly steady pace. Mike's nervousness turned into outright panic. He kept asking me to drive faster, his voice trembling. The figure grew closer, its outline becoming clearer. My heart raced as I tried to focus on the road while glancing anxiously at the figure in the distance. Suddenly, Mike grabbed my arm and begged me to stop. He claimed he recognized the figure as someone dangerous from his past. I was torn between stopping and continuing to drive. In a moment of desperation, Mike made a frantic call on his phone, muttering something about needing help and getting out of here. His voice was filled with terror, and his hands were shaking. The figure seemed to have vanished, but the tension was palpable. Mike's call seemed to calm him down a bit, but my apprehension grew. I decided to check the area where I last saw the figure. We pulled over, and I cautiously stepped out into the freezing cold. There, in the snow, were fresh tire tracks leading off into the woods. The tracks seemed to end abruptly, as if the vehicle had suddenly stopped or turned around. My stomach dropped as I realized the chilling possibility that someone might have been watching us. Just as I was about to return to the car, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see Mike standing by the car, but his expression was no longer fearful. Now it was cold and calculating. He slowly approached me, and I could see that he was holding something in his hand. It was a knife. My heart raced as he told me that he had lured me into a trap. His story about his car breaking down and the shadowy figure a ruse to get me into a vulnerable position. Panic surged through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. I had to think quickly. I lunged for the car door, managing to get inside and lock it just as Mike reached for me. I started the engine and sped away, tires skidding on the icy road. I could see Mike running after me, but he soon disappeared into the snow. My mind was racing as I drove, heart pounding, knowing that I had barely escaped a potentially fatal encounter. I finally reached a safe area and called the police. They found Mike's abandoned car and the disturbing evidence of his deceit. Though I was safe, the fear never fully left me. Every night drive since then has been haunted by the memory of that encounter. The darkness of those snowy roads and the sight of that shadowy figure continue to linger in my mind, a chilling reminder of how close I came to a nightmare. It was a typical Tuesday evening, and I was just finishing up a long day at the office in downtown Portland. My routine drive home was usually a time for me to unwind, listening to podcasts and enjoying the quiet. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the streets were lit with the warm glow of street lamps. As I turned onto the familiar Route 26, I felt a sense of calm. Little did I know, this ordinary drive would soon spiral into something profoundly unsettling. About 20 minutes into my drive, I noticed a car behind me that seemed to be following at an unusually close distance. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence, but the car's headlights were eerily bright, and it remained consistently behind me despite my efforts to change lanes and speed up. My anxiety began to build as I turned onto a more secluded road, hoping the car would pass me, but it remained steadfastly in my rearview mirror. I decided to pull into a 24-hour gas station, thinking that if I stopped, the car would finally pass. I parked at the far end of the lot, and the car pulled in right behind me, stopping several spaces away. My heart raced as I watched the driver get out, a figure dressed in dark clothing and a hat pulled low over their face. I could barely see their features, but something about their posture seemed unnervingly deliberate. I stayed in my car, hoping that staying put would make me less of a target. As I watched, the figure approached the gas station store but seemed to hesitate at the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me, so I tried to act casual, pretending to be engrossed in my phone. Every few seconds I would glance up to see if they were still there, and each time I felt a chill run down my spine as the figure's presence loomed closer. Suddenly I heard a faint but clear voice over my car's radio, an unusual interference that sounded like someone speaking but distorted and unintelligible. I tried to tune it out, thinking it was just a random signal interference, but the voice persisted, growing slightly clearer and more urgent. It was then that I noticed the figure outside had stopped and was now standing directly in front of my car, their head tilted as if listening to the same disturbing transmission. Confused and frightened, I debated whether to stay put or drive away. The presence of the figure outside was unsettling, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or escalate the situation. I decided to wait and see if the figure would leave, hoping they would lose interest. As the minutes ticked by, the figure remained stationary, their head occasionally turning towards me, adding to my growing sense of dread. When I finally mustered the courage to leave the gas station, the figure got back into their car and followed me out of the lot. My palms were sweating as I drove, my thoughts racing with every turn I took. I tried to keep calm, driving through a series of turns to see if the car would stop following me, but each time I looked in my rearview mirror, the car was still there, its headlights unwavering. I decided to head towards a well-lit, populated area, an old shopping center that was still open despite the late hour. If I could just reach a place with more people around, I hoped I would feel safer. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw the car follow me in and park a few spaces away. I quickly parked and got out, looking around desperately for anyone who could offer assistance, but the lot seemed eerily empty. As I stood by my car, trying to make a phone call, I noticed the figure getting out of their car and heading towards me. They moved deliberately, their steps slow and calculated. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I needed to act fast. I darted into the nearest store, hoping to find safety among the few remaining customers. The store clerk looked at me with concern as I explained the situation, but their reassurance did little to calm my frayed nerves. While I was in the store, I kept an eye on the parking lot through the window. To my horror, the figure's car was now parked right outside the store's entrance. As I tried to leave, I saw the figure standing near my car, their face partially illuminated by the store's lights. They seemed to be waiting, their posture rigid and tense. I realized that leaving the store might put me directly in their path, so I stayed inside, hoping the police would arrive soon. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw a police car pull into the lot. The figure quickly got into their car and sped off, leaving me in a daze. The officers questioned me and reviewed the store's security footage, but the figure's identity remained a mystery. They were gone, but the fear and uncertainty lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly sinister, Even after the police investigation concluded with no leads, the experience left an indelible mark on me. I continued my daily routine, but every shadow, every unexpected noise, was a reminder of that night. The sense of being watched and followed never truly faded, and I found myself constantly checking my surroundings. It was a haunting reminder that sometimes the terror we experience is not always visible or fully understood, but its impact can last a lifetime. I had just wrapped up a long shift at the diner, and the clock on my dashboard read 2:30 a.m. The streets of Portland, Oregon were eerily quiet as I made my way home. My old Honda Civic was a comforting cocoon amidst the desolate cityscape, and I had my favorite playlist humming softly. Despite the late hour, I felt a strange sense of calm, perhaps due to the comforting routine of my nightly drive. It was a route I knew well, through familiar neighborhoods and past the occasional all-night gas station. As I approached the intersection near the edge of town, a flicker of movement caught my eye, just a shadow darting across the road. Nothing unusual, I told myself, just the late-night weirdness. As I drove away from the gas station, I noticed an unmarked car trailing behind me. It was a nondescript sedan with tinted windows that seemed to hover just out of my rearview mirror's reach. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, perhaps another late-night traveler. But as the minutes ticked by, the car stayed close, maintaining the same distance regardless of my speed. I turned onto a side street, hoping to lose it in the maze of suburban roads. The car followed. The creeping anxiety in my chest grew with every turn, amplifying the unease that had started at the gas station. I decided to drive through the old industrial area, hoping to shake the unmarked car. The streets here were narrow and less traveled, with buildings casting ghostly shadows under the streetlights. As I navigated the labyrinth of decaying warehouses, I began to hear faint whispers through my slightly open window. The voices were indistinct but seemed to grow louder as I drove. My heart raced, and I rolled up the window, straining to focus on the road. The whispers faded, but the eerie sensation of being followed intensified, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. Turning onto a desolate country road, I hoped the isolation would deter the car behind me. After a few miles, I came across a dilapidated roadside attraction, a crumbling old billboard with peeling paint and an overgrown lot. The place looked abandoned, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban streets it had just left. I slowed down, my curiosity piqued by the bizarre sight. As I drove past, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows, staring out at the road. My gut twisted with fear, and I sped up, trying to put as much distance between myself and that unsettling scene. Just when I thought I was finally escaping the situation, a new sound pierced the silence, a rhythmic thudding that seemed to come from beneath my car. It was a disconcerting, persistent noise that made my stomach drop. I pulled over to the side of the road, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Stepping out of the car, I inspected the undercarriage but found nothing unusual. The sound ceased abruptly, leaving only the oppressive silence of the night. As I got back into the car, the unsettling feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. Trying to calm myself, I reached for my phone to call a friend or check directions. To my horror, there was no signal, just a blank screen with no service flashing. The isolation of the road suddenly felt more menacing. I drove on, hoping to find a more populated area or a place to regroup. The streetlights grew fewer and farther between, and my sense of dread only deepened. Every turn seemed to lead me further into an endless, oppressive darkness. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing by the road, its form barely illuminated by the dim light of my headlights. I couldn't make out any details, but it was clear that the figure was watching me. My pulse quickened as I drove past, trying to ignore the image of the lone figure. A glance in the rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness and the vague outline of the road behind me. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming, and I began to wonder if I would ever see civilization again. With every minute feeling like an eternity, I desperately sought a sign of life or a place to stop. I saw a faint light in the distance, which I hoped was a house or a small town. My heart sank as I realized it was just a distant farmhouse with a few lights on, probably abandoned. I decided to approach it, hoping someone there might help or at least let me use their phone. As I approached, the farmhouse looked increasingly neglected and unwelcoming. My hopes for safety dwindled as I noticed the overgrown yard and the eerie stillness that surrounded it. As I got closer, the farmhouse lights flickered erratically. The door creaked open and I saw a figure standing in the doorway, a woman with a blank, hollow expression. She simply stared at me, her eyes vacant and unsettling. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. The woman didn't move and the front door swung shut with a harsh bang. I turned around to leave, only to find the unmarked car from earlier parked right behind me, its engine purring menacingly. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled back into my car, heart pounding in my chest. I tore out of the driveway, the unmarked car immediately in pursuit. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, and my mind raced for any escape route. The country road stretched on endlessly, with no sign of relief in sight. I could see the headlights of the unmarked car closing in on me, a chilling reminder that I was not alone. I pushed the car to its limits, hoping for a chance to lose the pursuing vehicle. I finally managed to lose the unmarked car by taking a series of sharp turns and driving through a narrow dirt path. As dawn began to break, I pulled into a small town and found a place to rest, though sleep was elusive. The fear lingered like a shadow, and the events of the night replayed in my mind. I never found out who was behind that car or what the true intentions were. But every late-night drive since has been haunted by the echoes of that terrifying night, and the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't escaped still chills me to this day.